Welcome everybody and good afternoon. My name's Tim Blevins and I'm with Special Collections in the 1905 Carnegie Library. That's Regional History and Genealogy. We're grateful today to recognize Helen McCaffery and her late husband Jim for their generous financial support of Special Collections. And I'm going to be pretty much reading my remarks because, as you all know, every word I say is really important. Can you hear me better this way? Okay. During the past 3 years, gifts from the Helen and James McCaffery Fund for Regional History have supported Special Collections, educational films, preservation efforts, lectures, their Pikes Peak Regional History Symposium, and exhibits. Beginning in 2011, with the McCaffery's financial support, Special Collections filled more than 200 requests for Colorado schools for free DVDs of PPLD TV's film called Frozen to Death on Pikes Peak, a cold case investigation. Nearly 100 additional copies of the DVD were also provided at no cost to the Colorado History Day coordinators to give to their teachers, who were using these videos in their classrooms to instruct students on historical research and storytelling. Helen's support has made possible a second PPLD TV and Special Collections film, and this was called Phantoms in the Archives, Unlocking a Manitou Springs Mystery. And this drew 305 people to the premiere, which that was despite the cold of a March afternoon on a Sunday. And the reason the date was important is it was the 150th anniversary or birthday of Emma Crawford. The film's story started with mysterious images of glass plate photographic negatives and evolved into tales of ghosts and Emma Crawford and her sister Alice. Helen enabled our purchase of equipment to digitize our 16mm film collection, and this is to make them the movies much more easily accessible, as well as equipment to better monitor our Special Collections storage environments to improve the care of our precious materials. Her support has been vital to fund lectures and the past 3 Pikes Peak Regional History Symposium, which was recently awarded the American Association of State and Local History Leadership in History Award of Merit for the past decade of events, DVDs, books, and related exhibits, which we did with the Colorado Springs Pioneers Museum. Additional exhibits were made possible by Helen's support, which included a backstory, memoir of a proud boy, a poem by Carl Sandburg. This small exhibit is about Carl Sandburg when he was in Colorado Springs in 1929, and the historical backstory about a poem which he wrote about the Ludlow Massacre and his friend Don McGregor, who was present at the Ludlow Massacre. Helen also donated her collection of fine cameras, which she and Jim used to photograph Colorado. The equipment will help to educate people about the history of photography and film technology. And many of the cameras and accessories that are included in the exhibit opening today, just immediately behind me, in the exhibit called A Lifetime of Exposures, Cameras That Captured Colorado. This exhibit was researched and installed by our photo archivist, Bill Thomas, who I'd like to introduce to you now. William G. Bill Thomas is an amateur historian, a retired professional soldier, a formally educated librarian, and he is our photo archivist here at Pikes Peak Library District Special Collections. Bill earned a BS in political science from the University of Maryland, a BA in history from the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, and an MS in library science and information studies from Florida State University. Bill will present historic gems from the photo archives. Please welcome Bill Thomas.
It worked. Evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming out. I think the weather is cooperating with us today. As you all know, Aristotle and Galileo had a lot to say about the world around them. Tonight I want to talk just a little bit about what they had to say about falling objects in space. Based on everyday observations, Aristotle believed that objects with a greater mass would fall faster than objects with less mass if dropped at the same time. So, for example, if I had a hammer in one hand and I had a feather in the other, and I dropped them both at the same time, Aristotle believed the hammer would hit the ground before the feather does. Kind of makes sense. He went further, and he said if I had a big rock and a little rock, and I dropped them both at the same time, the big rock would hit the ground before the little rock. It kind of makes sense. But he went even further and said, in the absence, and of course he knew that atmosphere would impede, the air that we breathe would impede the fall of the feather. But he went further and even said that if there were no atmosphere at all, still the hammer would fall to the ground quicker than the feather. Now, of course, Galileo understood what Aristotle had to say, but he disagreed. Galileo believed that if I had a hammer in one hand and a feather in the other hand, and I dropped them both at the same time, in the absence of air, they would both hit the ground at the same time. So a real significant difference between the two of those. But of course, we know that Aristotle and Galileo couldn't really test their theory because they couldn't find the appropriate environment to do it. However, in 1971, the crew of Apollo 15 on the surface of the moon could and did test that theory. I'm going to show you a short video, about 2 minutes worth, but before I start it, I want to ask you to kind of prep you, pay attention to two things. First, the experiment. Colonel David Scott is the commander of the mission. He's the one who's conducting the experiment, so watch that. You'll figure out whether Aristotle or Galileo is correct. And second, I'd like to ask you to pay attention to what Colonel Scott has to say about the feather, because that's important.
Tim, we copied both solar wind and pentatron or drum in the ETB.
Not quite yet. I haven't put the solar wind in yet, but I will shortly. I want to watch this. I have a good picture there. I've got the...
Beautiful picture, Dave.
Well, in my left hand I have a feather. In my right hand a hammer. And I guess one of the reasons we got here today was because of a gentleman named Galileo a long time ago who made a rather significant discovery about falling objects in gravity fields. And we thought that where would be a better place to confirm his findings than on the moon. And so we thought we'd try it here for you. The feather happens to be appropriately a falcon feather for our falcon. And I'll drop the two of them here, and hopefully they'll hit the ground at the same time. How about that?
It worked. Galileo was right. So we'll just let this play out. So as you heard, Air Force Colonel David Scott, the commander of the mission, makes a very deliberate point of telling us this is a falcon feather. A falcon feather, right? He could have said chicken feather, eagle feather, hawk feather, a falcon feather that he says. So is that important? We wonder, is he sending a message to someone back here on Earth who's watching very specifically for that piece? You're still with me. You know we're going somewhere, right? So hang on. We'll get there. I'm about to bring this home. So about a year ago, this guy calls the library. And he asks a series of questions. And the first question is, do you have pictures of astronauts in your collection? And I said, yes, we do. Do you have pictures of the Apollo 15 crew in your library collection? And I said, yes, we do. Then he says, did you know that almost immediately after the crew returned from the moon, they made a special trip to the Air Force Academy? Do you have pictures of the Apollo 15 crew at the Air Force Academy in the fall of 1971? And I said, yes, we do. And I can tell by the tone of his voice, he's getting a little excited now. He's thinking he's on to something here. But he hesitates a bit, almost afraid to ask the next question. And this is the next question. Do you have pictures of the Apollo 15 crew at the Air Force Academy in the fall of 1971? holding a falcon? I said, we do. We definitely do. Now he's really excited. He is, can I see this picture? Where is it? Can you show it to me? Can you scan it? And of course, we did. There it is. It's worth noting that the guy in the middle is the commander. That's David Scott. He's the one who dropped the feather on the moon. At this point, the caller has a rather unusual request. And, he knows that we're not going to do this unless he comes clean. What is he trying to figure out here? So here's his theory. He believes the falcon feather that was dropped on the moon came from one of the falcons at the Air Force Academy, which sounded reasonable to us, and that this picture was taken with the exact falcon that donated the feather. So the researcher wants to do a sort of physical genealogy on this falcon, right? He wants to look closely at the markings, identify these things, then contact the office of the falconeers at the academy, whoever they are, and try to learn the name of the falcon that donated the feather that was dropped on the moon to prove Galileo was correct. So we did everything that we could. Sideways, upside down, infrared, everything that we could, and we were sure we had it right, so we sent it to him. And we're starting to get into this ourselves because we want to know the name of the falcon that donated the feather. It's been about a year now, and we're still waiting. We don't think he's going to come up with an answer. I think we're going to have to put this one in the cold case files, unless any of you know. I know there's some Air Force guys out here know the name of the feather that nobody knows. Okay, so if you do know, let me know, because we'd really like to know that. Sometimes we get interesting questions here at the library, and sometimes we just plain embarrass ourselves. And some of you may know that the Gazette is kind enough to run our historic photos just about every day, and probably some of you look at those. And when they have time, the staff at the Gazette, they'll do a nice little research job and connect this image to something here locally. But when they don't have time, they'll just pull the caption from our database and just sort of run with it and hope nobody complains too bad. So one morning I'm eating my cereal and I'm looking at the paper like I always do on my computer. I'm flipping through it. I'm really anxious to see what picture they run, so I'm going as fast as I can. I'm getting to that point. And this particular day, I see this photograph. And I look at the caption, and the caption says, "Well-dressed man on Pikes Peak conducting weather experiments." Clearly this was one of those days where they didn't have time, and they used one of our captions. And something didn't seem right to me, so no sooner than I read that, my iPhone starts lighting up my email. I'm getting emails, bing, 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 and I'm thinking, this is 6 o'clock in the morning, this is not good. So tentatively, I'm looking at my emails just to make sure, and certainly the subject lines were today's photo, Gazette photo, today's photo. And I want to add quickly, in case any of you are here, they're all from well-meaning, good friends, just wanting to help us get them right, but we don't always do that. So here are the emails. The first one, bing, Bill, I think the date is wrong on that picture. The collar doesn't look right. We got some folks who really know these things. Bing, Bill, I don't think he's conducting weather experiments. Bing, Bill, that well-dressed man is Dr. Edward Schneider. I didn't know. Bing, Bill, Dr. Schneider was the head of Colorado College's biology department. Bill, Dr. Schneider is world famous. Didn't you know that? Bill, Dr. Schneider conducted groundbreaking, cutting-edge experiments on the effect of high altitude on the human body, which was why he was at the top of Pikes Peak. It's pretty common knowledge, Bill. But I didn't know it. I just didn't. So before the day was out, I had heard from good friends, from historical societies, and even the archivist at Colorado College. You know, they say you learn more from your mistakes. I learned a heck of a lot about Dr. Schneider that day. Sometimes photographs are placed side by side. When they're placed side by side, they tell us something more than we can learn from an individual photograph. These are the Alexander brothers. You probably have heard of the Alexander brothers. Famous film company, they built airplanes. They were here in town for a long, long time. And if I were to tell you that one of these brothers was a quiet, studious, thoughtful engineer, and the other was a loud, outgoing, gregarious salesman, I bet you would have no trouble figuring out which one is which. And together, these guys were one heck of a crew that did a great job in their business. I love this one. Here is a young man determined to conquer the cog rail, a thrill seeker, a daredevil, someone willing to risk it all to see what it feels like to hurtle down the track at 60 miles an hour without a helmet, without boots, without knee pads, without a flak jacket. Just look at the determination on this guy's face. This young man is Ori Stewart, one of two brothers who started the locally famous Stewart Brothers Photography Company, which incidentally is one of our largest photograph collections. In contrast, this is his brother Ben, conservative, thoughtful, reserved, careful, someone you would trust to watch your house or even take care of your dog while you're on vacation. And I leave it to you to decide which one of these people made city council and which one didn't. It was not Ori, but again, together, they ran one heck of a business. If you'll allow me, I'd like to bring Aristotle back in. You're in the library after all, so we've got to give him some due. In his work on rhetoric, Aristotle suggested there are three elements that we can use to be persuasive in an argument. And they are logos, ethos, and pathos. I'm about to show you 6 lithographs, and here you should be thinking like Harper's Weekly, Frank Leslie's Illustrated, those sort of images. And I'd like to invite you to think of a lithograph as an argument. The artist is trying to persuade you of something and is using at least one of Aristotle's ideas to do that. This is why, to me, lithographs are such an interesting art form, because you're engaged deeply. The artist is pulling out all the stops, trying to connect with you on an emotional basis. They're very, very powerful. So this is the first one, Heading West. It's a very idealistic, grand sweep of history, bold and brave. These families have pulled up their roots and left everything behind for a new way of life out west. Plus, it's got a dog in it, right there. A really cool stream. I'm not sure where that comes from, but I think it worked for the picture, a great one. But not all of these journeys out west ended up the way the folks hoped they would when they started. Some of them ended up like this. All too often, the dream of a new life out west ended in tragedy. Here's another one that you could look at and think about how powerful this one is. There's a visitor in the window, and the family is frightened to death. Here's mom, and here's some children. The little guy's got him a knife. Think about the image that this portrayed to the people back east at the time who had family members out here. They were worried about them. So lots of emotion going on in this one. One of my favorite all-time here. You all know that Colorado Springs was started out. The idea was no liquor in this town. Could you imagine the audacity of creating a town in the middle of ranchers and cowboys and not allow anybody to have a beer? Well, I think the artist here is sort of capturing that whole sentiment pretty well. You can see, I think this guy is maybe putting a coin in, and then out here comes a drink. No one knows who put the coin in, and no one knows who's drinking the beer, but things are working out pretty good. Plus, there's a dog in there. I always like the dogs. So the miners also needed to have a little fun, too. And on Saturday night, they would go to the local cabin with the canvas cover, pay 50 cents and dance with the ladies and drink a little beer. I think the gentlemen are having fun. I'm not so sure about the ladies, but it is Saturday night. And after Saturday night, of course, comes Sunday morning. And here they're reluctantly pulling out their last nickel that they didn't use to buy beer and giving it to the pastor for the service. I know that was pretty quick, but something to think of the next time you see a lithograph is to sort of think about the emotion and how the artist is trying to connect with you at a very deep and visceral level. Faces, faces, faces. I love seeing images with faces. Psychologists tell us that human beings are incredibly evolved when it comes to reading facial expressions. Through evolution, we have developed this important ability because our very survival depends upon it. Do we see anger in this person's face? Do we see sadness? Would this person help us if we needed help? Do we see happiness, wisdom? So for the next few minutes, I'm going to ask you to take a look at some images and try your hand at reading emotions to see how evolved you really are. We're going to use some of my favorite photographs to do that. And as I look around, I see there are some people here who aren't really from Colorado Springs, so might not know the history of the photographs that I'm going to use. So I'm going to take just a minute to sort of give you a little historical context to help you. The setting is a Cripple Creek, the Labor Wars, 1903 and 1904. Unionized miners are striking. They're striking for safer working conditions, an 8-hour day, paid overtime, and the right to organize. The struggle escalated to the point where the governor had to call out the National Guard. The problem was the state didn't have the money to pay the National Guard their salaries. The mine owners and the bankers said, no problem. We'll take care of that. We'll pay the salaries of the National Guards. Just keep them here and do what we need them to do. So think about this. If you're in a dispute, you've got two parties in a dispute, and the party that you're in a dispute with is paying the salary of the National Guard who's been paid to resolve the dispute, you can see how the dynamic of the situation changes quite a bit. So what happens is that the National Guard, things escalate, the National Guard eventually starts arresting, it beats some, and then deports some of the miners that I'm going to show you. So that's the historical context. And this is what they look like. Here's the first one, Pat Mullaney. He's one of our classic figures. We used him for a lot of different publications. But try to read some of the emotion here on this guy's face. He's got his bandage on, so clearly he was just beat up. And now he's in some authority figure's office having his picture taking just before he's going to be kicked out of the state. So I'm not sure what emotion you can read here, but I'm thinking resentment and maybe anger on Pat's face. This next one, L.A. Krotz, is one of my favorite all times. This guy is also in front of the same authorities. He's got a completely different attitude. His attitude is, hey, I don't care, bring it on. I mean, defiance in his purest sense, I think. At least that's what I see. Same setting. Another guy doesn't seem so defiant at all. This is Tom Wilson. I see a lot of fear and a lot of insecurity on his face. Same setting, another miner, John Hackward. He's feeling pretty good about it. I mean, he's like, I don't know for sure if he's taunting these people or he just doesn't understand what's happening, but he doesn't look upset at all. The next one, W.T. Lynch, I cannot read him, so maybe you can. He's got interesting eyes, to say the least. I don't know how to read them. Sometimes I think they're spooky, and sometimes when I look harder at them, they look like they sort of change into profound sadness. One of those images that kind of go both ways, at least that's the way it does for me. I honestly can't tell. The next one, there's no problem for me at all. Mr. W.F. Lally. For me, Mr. Lally doesn't want to be there. He's not happy. He is sad. This was all a big mistake coming to the United States. I should never have come here in the first place. Send me back to Ireland with my family. I miss them a lot. Next is Mr. Harper. Mr. Harper, there are people in this room who may know more about Mr. Harper than I do, so I'm not going to say much. Mr. Harper was a union leader. He was a lawyer. He was with the group that was deported. He went on to live an incredible life and do some really, really important things for people that he met. If any of you know the button, I would love to know what that's about, because we've been trying to figure that one out for a few years. So if you do know, please let me know. I'd like to know that one. One afternoon in March 1976, Myron Wood jumped in his car and headed up to Manitou Springs. He was carrying his camera like he did every day, looking for a good picture. That's what photographers do. After a while, he gets a little hungry and he ducks into this small restaurant in Manitou Springs for a bite to eat, and that's when he sees her. So I'm going to leave you in that little restaurant 37 years ago and fast forward to 2013. I'm downstairs in the photo archives, and I get a call from one of our staff members who's sitting right here. Her name is Sandy. She says, "Bill, there's a lady here to see you about photographs. Could you come up, please?" I said, "Sure, that's of course." So I come upstairs, and I see a lady with long black hair and dark sunglasses. She introduces herself, and she explains, many years ago, when she was only 17 years old, she was a waitress in a small restaurant up in Manitou Springs. And she says, one afternoon, a gentleman, and she said that very deliberately, and I remember that, a gentleman came into the restaurant and asked if he could take my pictures. And I'm 17 years old. I said, "Sure, I'm happy to do that." So she did a little posing, and he left. But before he left, he said, "If you ever want to see these pictures, here's a number. I'm going to write this number down," and he gave it to her. Well, by the time she found us, Myron Wood had been dead for many years. But it was good because we have his collection. So she showed me the number and said that Myron Wood said if we would ever get this number, this would help find the photographs. And of course, it wasn't a phone number. You know that professional photographs who take thousands and thousands of images over their lifetime have to catalog these things in some way, and that's what this number was. So I wrote down the number, and I said, and I got her email address, and I said, "I'll do my best. I can't promise anything, but I'll do my best to find them, and if I do, I'll let you know." Well, it didn't take long, and we found them. And we made a contact print, and here it is. This is the 9 images that Myron Wood took of this 17-year-old girl. I think they're rather lovely, actually, of this 17-year-old girl up in Manitou Springs back in 1976. So I sent her an email with this attachment. And I said, "We have them. Would you like to order one?" And she was ecstatic. "I've been looking for these for 37 years, and I finally found them. Yes, I want to order one." So my question to you is, which one did she choose? So I'd like to ask you to play along with me, please. Just a simple raise of a hand. So I'm going to go through each one of these, and when we get to the one that you think is the best, do you think she ordered, please raise your hand. And I'm going to write down some numbers. So let's start with 22, bottom left-hand corner. Does anybody think that's the one that she ordered? Number 23. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 24. 25. Ooh. 26. Let me look at 26. Okay. 27. 27 and 26 are about the same, aren't they, really? So we're going to call those both the same. One is a little lighter than the other, but they're basically the same. Well, she's shaking her head. Not quite. If you really discern, they're a little different. Myron Wood knew what he was doing. He got different images every time. 28. Got a few there. 29. And 30. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, thank you. I've recorded the results. Lucky for us, I've also hired an independent auditor to record these votes. So there will be no dispute, and the person who did it is above board, totally honest, and he's also my boss. So I would like to, well, before I do that, they say the wisdom of a crowd is, you've heard that, a lot better than the wisdom of individuals. I'm thinking you're a pretty wise crowd, you wouldn't be here, and I'm thinking you probably got this one right, at least by my numbers, but I should check with the auditor just to make sure that I know which image was the image number that most people voted on. Tim? We rehearsed this morning, come on. 27, you guys got it, 27. Actually, this is the one she liked the most. But 26 and 27 were pretty close, but you saw that the lighting was a little different. But this is the one that she liked the most. But I think they're all pretty good, really. So that was one afternoon in Manitou Springs. Thank you for listening to that little story. The next 5 images I want to show you are very important to us in a very different way. And I think the best way to explain them is that in 1962, Myron Wood and Nancy Wood took their cameras to a ranch south of here and took some shots of a rambunctious little guy that they called Little Wrangler. They created a book with him in it. I'm not sure if they went down to take his pictures exactly, but they wanted to take the ranch, and this little guy stole the show, I think. And I want to show you these, and I like to ask you just to sort of be silent as I go through each one of them, because it's important that we finish them all. But there's some extraordinary pictures, and they're really meaningful to us. So if I would just go through a few of them. There's a little wrangler practicing his roping. Here he is, influencing some animals, looking around the gate, mugging for the camera, knowing that he's there. And then, of course, some of you know, probably many of you know, that the Little Wrangler was actually Kirk Hanna. And there's an incredible film on the life of Kirk Hanna that explores his challenges and his dreams. And the title of the film is Hanna Ranch. It just came out, and I urge you very much to review it. You'll be very glad that you did. Photographs, of course, can do a very good job of documenting a bygone era. It's always fascinating to me to see 2 images side by side, one that tells us what was and one that tells us what is. And I'm about to show you some pretty unusual photographs, not only because they capture some iconic structures, those that are now gone, but also because they're in color. They're pretty rare. You don't see many of these old images in color. The last few images that I'm going to show you tonight are ones that are taken by Helen and James McCaffery, the wonderful people that we're honoring here today. So this one, you may recognize the top one, some of you who've been here a while. I think this garage may have gone by several different names over the years. We think of as Mark Shuffle, but it's the garage that if you were to look right there and right there, that's where this garage was. So if any of you park down below, you're parking inside that garage. The building below it, of course, is the library that you can see right there. So that has changed the landscape quite a bit. This, many of you will recognize as the wonderful Burns building, the Chief. This is before and after, and the bottom one looks like it's just about gone. The facade is still there, but not much left. I wasn't here to see the Chief or the Burns, but a lot of people really have some great things to say about it, some good memories of that place. This is the Albany Hotel. You can see the garage. Get my laser. There's the garage. They kind of help you put this in perspective. Just the corner of Kiowa and Cascade. There's the Albany. There's the black and white. An image below it, you can see the Antlers Hotel. I think you can see the garage. You can see the Albany Hotel has basically been decapitated. And then this image, the top one is about the same, but the bottom one shows you what's there now, the A&B Bank building. Big changes on that corner. This is St. Mary's School. And since it is the last and signature image of this exhibit, I'd like to linger here for a few minutes and talk about it. As you have seen, we have lost several magnificent structures in this community over the years. In some of our less thoughtful moments, I think perhaps we are a bit too quick to condemn those who allowed this to happen. Those people, I think, were looking forward to the future, anxious to build something new for us. We now look back and wish they had preserved something old for us to treasure. But I don't think we should be so harsh in our condemnation. They had their own reality to deal with, as do we. Perhaps we shouldn't assume wisdom that is not ours. But there is something else in this picture that we shouldn't overlook. Not everything from St. Mary's was destroyed. Something very valuable has been saved for us. And I think those priests and those nuns and those administrators knew that the building they allowed to be destroyed was just that, an old building, a material thing that could be replaced. Much to their credit, I think, they understood there was something more profound that they could pass along to us, something they thought that we would need much more than just an old building. And those were the ideas of compassion, of mercy, of grace, and kindness. And I believe in their minds, they thought that the best way they could do that would be to save something that they valued above all else. And that thing in their mind embodied these virtues. And this is what they saved for us. She's a little tarnished and she's a little faded, but she stands as a gift to us from a past generation, because this is what they thought we would need the most. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Bill. That was fabulous. Had a great time. You could tell from Bill's presentation that Helen and James McCaffery were avid photographers. We're pleased to have their documentary photographs in our collection. So thank you very much, Helen. We appreciate that. I wanted to invite Helen to say a few words, and I also wanted to recognize her good friends who are with her here today, Nathaniel and Anita Peters. Thank you for coming.
I want to say how wonderful I think it was, and all the work that you all did to get it together. We should all appreciate it. Thank you.
Delgado Peters, my wife, has a very interesting story to tell about how the photograph that you took with Jim, how this all got started. Nita, just very briefly.
Do you want me to use that mic? I'll use that. I'd rather face the audience. It all started in an alley. I met Helen in an alley. She lives next door to us, and the parking alley is between us. And we happened to meet one day, and after meeting several times, she mentioned that she had this big collection of photographs she and Jim had taken, and that they were in her basement in slide format. And I said, "Oh, Helen, if you have a lot of pictures of Colorado Springs, you ought to give them to the library." "Oh, no, they'll just end up in a basement and covered with dust." So one day we happened to be over here floating around in the Carnegie Library, and Nancy Thaler, the photo archivist at the time, was here, and I said, "Well, let's talk to her. Let's see what she says." And I had already previously talked to Nancy to say, "Helen's got a lot of photos of Colorado Springs. talk to her and see if she would be willing to donate them. So Nancy just was charming, told Helen how much use they would get, how many people come here, use the library, are interested in photographs of how the city used to look. And so Helen and I started to work together to get these slides into a format that the library could use. And once they put them on CD, they gave them back to us, Nancy gave them back to us in a big thick notebook and asked us to label every picture, anything we knew about it, the date, anything. So for 4 years, that's how long it took Helen and I to go over every picture, try to guess what the year was. We had to involve Nat's car friends from Kansas City to go back over and make sure we didn't say that a picture was a 1960 picture and it had a 1970 car in it. So we had them double check us to make sure the dates were okay, and we had a ball checking, just going through them all and reminiscing in our memories, and it was wonderful. And I thank you for that, Helen. I want to tell you about one thing that she did to me. She wanted the format of the then and now. She was absolutely insistent that that's how she wanted them posted. There were a few pictures that she didn't have the now of. And one of them was the scene from over 25 that goes right over Colorado Avenue. And you can see the antlers, the Pioneers Museum. You can see the city in the future, I mean, in the distance. There were cars coming, 50s cars, coming in this lane toward the camera, and there were none in this lane going away. Helen said, let's go up where that was taken and see if we can get a current picture. So we go up on 25, park precariously on the east side of 25. She gives me the camera and she says, you get out and take it. So I did, but I had to stand there with all this traffic going by behind me until only cars were filling this lane and no cars were filling that lane. So if you get on the website, look at that picture because I sacrificed my life for it. And I just want to say to Helen, this was a wonderful journey. We had many wonderful stories that I wish that she could share with all of you. The pictures triggered them off and she would tell stories. She knew Dad Bruce, she knew Myron Wood, she knew Lou Tilley. So she has wonderful, wonderful stories. Thank you very much for this occasion. It's a wonderful culmination of her efforts, Jim's efforts, and my just coming in there in between.
Thank you, Nita. I'm wondering if you have any other friends who might have some photographs. We really appreciate everything that Helen has done for us and want to recognize that, and we thought today was an appropriate day to dedicate our photo archives in honor of Helen and James McCaffery. There's some signage downstairs. The photo archives is downstairs. So we're going to wrap up now and let you all kind of roam around. The photo archives, the archives and the genealogy section are downstairs. We have staff members all over the building who are available to answer any of your questions. Thanks again for attending.